Good evening, everybody. My name's Gail Thomas Strong. I'm with WFYI, and I want to welcome you to our 25th Conversation about Education here at Central Library. This is a partnership and a collaboration between WFYI, Chalkbeat Indiana, and the library, all of us caring deeply about outcomes for children in this community. For WFYI, this is about our American Graduate Initiative and doing all that we can to ensure that children in our community make it to high school graduation on time and ready for the next steps in life. For Chalkbeat, this is around great education reporting, and for the library, this should be a hub of information and a place where people can come together to talk. So we're so pleased that all of you have done this tonight. I'm going to guess that several of you in this audience read the series Lost in Translation. Would you raise your hand if you read that on Chalkbeat, in the Star, heard it on FYI? It was a great series, wasn't it? It was an awesome series, and we hope that that's the beginning of a really rich and important conversation tonight, and in the State House, and in schools, and in community centers about what it takes to get kids who are English language learners firmly on a path. I would tell you that as this evening progresses, that we will watch a short video clip that Hayleigh Colombo, a reporter for Chalkbeat, will lead a conversation with us. She's got some great panelists that she will introduce, and then we will be more than happy to take questions and allow you to be in dialogue with these terrific guests. So with that, I am going to introduce and give the microphone to Hayleigh Colombo, one of the excellent reporters on this series, and she will be our moderator tonight. Thanks, Hayleigh.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. We're so excited about this conversation. I'm a reporter for Chalkbeat Indiana. We are a news website that reports on education in Indianapolis and across the state. And, you know, we're so grateful to have these panelists here with us tonight. I just want to reiterate my thanks to our partners, WFYI, the Central Library, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the American Graduate Project, and the Indy Star for their help in supporting our event tonight. So yeah, tonight it's all about talking about how to support English language learners in Indiana in our schools. Obviously, this is an important education issue for many of you guys in the room. A lot of you guys are very familiar with this and work every day with these students, but until recently, this was a topic that I think was largely unknown to the general public. I just wanted to give a little bit of background about how our series, Lost in Translation, came together. About 4 months ago, myself and my team at Chalkbeat, along with a reporter from the Indy Star and a reporter from WFYI, we started just exploring questions about how English language learners were served in our schools. Some of the questions that we were pondering: is it fair that students who are new to English and sometimes new to the country are expected to take high-stakes state tests? How do teachers work with students who they don't understand and who don't understand them? And what is it like to escape a refugee camp and start high school having never sat in a desk before? To find the answers, we started talking to you guys. We started talking to people on this panel tonight, and we were just absolutely amazed at the stories that came out of that, and that those stories formed the basis for our series, Lost in Translation. It was really clear to us that after that series published, we were genuinely surprised at kind of the reaction from it. Kind of seemed like it struck a nerve, with teachers and with the general public who were just grappling with this challenge in their schools, and who, largely felt like they were unsupported or struggling with it or had found success. There was just a lot of people who had an amazing story to tell. So we hope that tonight is a continuation of the dialogue from the series. We hope that tonight starts a new dialogue about serving English language learners, and we're so happy to have you guys here. So if you're following along with tonight's event on Twitter or using the live stream, please tweet us your questions and comments along the way using the hashtag AmGradIndy. That's AmGradIndy. And you can tweet that as you go. First, what we wanted to do before I introduce these amazing panelists, we wanted to hear from students who are, grappling with this challenge firsthand. Students over at Northwest High School have been putting together a documentary about their experience being students from Mexico in Indianapolis. So we wanted to just play a little clip from their documentary to get a sense of what students are facing. Thanks.
Diversity. Personally, I think it's what separates us from a different race. Some experiences where they're racist to you because you're different from them.
How do you think this has affected you?
How does it affect me? In a way, I think it has affected because now I see the people in a different way. I'm gonna say the racist stuff. Just have, especially black people, because I see they're here, they have that conflict. I would say that if the Hispanics and the blacks could get along, that would help out tremendously in the school, and it wouldn't affect so much of a bad reputation that the school has. In Northwest, no. When I first came to the United States, I definitely did experience some of that, because me being a Mexican, I was hoping that at least other Mexicans would at least, try to help me, especially translate stuff or ask stuff to the teacher, and they wouldn't do it. They would just say, hey, go back to Mexico. You don't belong here. And it's kind of messed up because they're Mexicans too. So what makes them belong here and what makes me not belong here? Is it just because you speak the language, or is it because of something else? Where they come up with that? At some point it was, because you have to learn their history, you have to learn the way they speak, the way they think, and not speaking the language, it was kind of complicated.
I think diversity means it's like any kind of environment where there's just different kinds of races of people. Like you say Hispanics, you got whites, blacks, Asians, just in one community.
All right, do you think that's good or bad?
I think it can go both ways. It just depends on the individuals.
Yes, when I was a freshman, we had less diversity in the school, and now I see more people from foreign countries come here, whether it be Middle Eastern countries, Mexico, Honduras, Salvador, and Thailand, and Philippines, and people from all over the world.
I'm not sure what it means, but I have a clue. Diversity is like what different people, like there's Hispanics, there's white, there's black, there's African, there's different people. Some people do. Some teachers, yeah, they be like, oh, well, you're from Mexico. Why are you here? How come you're not over there, But we're basically, we're basically here. I'm basically here because my parents, they want me to have a better life. They want me to not to be sitting in the office. You get paid instead of us cleaning bathrooms. Basically, when paying like minimum wage, when you could be sitting in the office, just basically on the computer answering phone calls, say secretaria, basically. You could get paid $20 an hour by just just sitting in an office instead of you just cleaning bathrooms. It's easier if you just get a college degree and then basically do something else. They feel uncomfortable because they're just like, oh, they speak this language. Like when I first got here, like I discovered new languages. Like I didn't know English that much. Like I had a hard time speaking it, and to this day I still have hard speaking it. Like I'm like, I stutter sometimes. I'm just, cause I can't say the word. Or I'm just like, wow, like a lot of people do have different languages. They're just really different, you know. I bet they feel weird. They're like, how come I can't find someone that speaks Spanish? Or how come I can't do this? They feel weird. They're like, it's different than from where I came from, you know.
All right, well, I wanted to introduce all of our panelists here today to start this discussion. First, we have Mayu Mutra. She is the founder of the Burmese Community Center for Education. She works with students on the north side of Indianapolis, in Indianapolis Public Schools. She started a community center to help them with their education. Then we have Eddie Rangel. He is a teacher at Indianapolis Public Schools, Key Learning Community, and he is a fifth grade teacher. We have Ellie Moy. She is a senior at Southport High School, and she just decided she's going to Butler. It's really exciting. And we have Charlie Geyer from the Indiana Department of Education, who has a really deep knowledge of policy surrounding English language learners. So let's get started. First, I wanted to kind of start with Charlie. At the department, you've had a firsthand view of, just an influx of English language learners into our schools. Can you tell us about how the city and state has changed demographically and how it's changed our schools?
Absolutely. So I think it's interesting. You have to go back, I want to take you back to 1999, where we may have had around 9,000 or 10,000 English learners in Indiana. And then you see tremendous growth just year after year after year to where now we're sitting close to 60,000. Which is an incredible amount of growth in a short amount of time. And as you look at Indiana stacked up in terms of percent growth, it puts us in the top few states. We wonder why Indiana? Well, there's lots of reasons. One, it's a great place to live. Two, it's close proximity to lots of different places. You have Chicago, you have Cincinnati, Columbus, go on and on. Major cities are here, which have large populations too, and potentially family members. Low cost of living is another way, and plentiful work. And so you see the state changing, and it's just not Indianapolis or in urban areas. What's interesting is almost every school district at this point has at least one English learner. And if you look at our top districts, it's communities like Goshen, like Warsaw, where the community has grown to where now we're talking about second and third generation English learners, just not first. And so we obviously have an influx of refugees as well. As Mayu knows, on the north side of Indianapolis, we've got Perry Township on the south side and Fort Wayne. And so the communities are changing. And obviously the schools are a microcosm of the greater community. And so the schools are changing at the same time, and communities are grappling with, what does this mean? What does it mean to honor all these different individuals who are living in our communities? How do we educate them equitably? How do we ensure high quality? And how do we ensure that students are graduating and going on to colleges and careers and being citizens and so forth. So everybody is struggling and thinking deeply about how do we do this in a way that makes sense. And obviously you've got local politics that are playing into this, as well as statewide politics. So as you look at year after year, the growth has been pretty steady with some tremendous spikes in certain years, certainly. But pretty continuous, and we expect that to continue.
By and large, how would you say schools have adapted to the steep growth?
I think that every school has taken its own pathway, and it has tried to figure out what does this mean for us individually. And there are heroes in this story, and there are those who are not heroes. And so everybody has, I think, taken their own individual pathway, trying to figure it out. To look at it as a whole, it's tough. That's all there is to it. And so I don't know if I could say statewide, this is how we've done, like, here's the A to F rating. I'm not going to do that. Everybody has their own, I think, journey in this work. But what I do know is that it takes a considerable amount of work by just not schools, but community members as a whole, stakeholders, family members, in ensuring high quality education for the students.
Ellie, I just wanted to ask you, so Ellie spent 2 years at a refugee camp in Malaysia. She's originally from Burma. Could you just tell us a little bit about what school was like in the refugee camp and what school was like when you came to America and eventually to Indiana, and just kind of tell us what that transition was like for you?
Okay. Basically, in school in Malaysia, we don't have desks or chair, or sometimes we'll sit on the floor. And then the buildings, they're pretty crowded. You have all these refugee kids, and you only have 3 classes at my school. And it is organized by like college students or students who are younger than me, like the Chin people, because they don't want children to just wander around. So they started an organization called Chin Student Organization. And since there's only 3 groups, so usually they would put children from 5 to 8, 9 in one group, and from 9 to 12 in one group, and 12 and above, we're all in one group, one big crowd. So, and then we don't have, like, our teachers they didn't get educated, first of all, but because they don't want us to go around just wander, so they try to teach us what they know. So they don't have these curriculums or things like that. We don't have textbooks or things like that. And the worst case will be going to school, wandering, or being scared if we might end up meeting a police or some bad people. And
what was it like transitioning for you from the Malaysia refugee camp so you were in North Carolina, and then you came to Indiana. So what was your first impressions of going to school here?
the first time coming to school in United States, I was still scared of the building and the people. Everything was so new. And not being able to understand what they say. But as I start school, the teachers are really awesome here, so thank you to all the teachers. Even though they don't understand, just imagine trying to communicate with a student that you don't speak their language. It's a big, not only for the student, but for the teachers, it's a big transition. And because the teachers try to understand us, it makes things a lot more easier for us. We get more time on a lot of things we do. And then being able to sit in a chair comfortably and having a table in front of us and having a smartboard, it is so awesome. It was so awesome. Thank you. It was so awesome. And even the food, like the school provide breakfast and lunch, and usually, depending on the income, we usually get free or reduced lunch. So, I mean, if you're hungry, you can really concentrate. So, the food, the school lunch is great. And especially because of the teachers, having to adapt and not understanding things at first hand, it's very scary. But because we have amazing teachers at our township, things get a lot more easier, and you get the attention that you need. So you don't actually feel like an outcast.
Thank you. Eddie, so you are not a teacher who is specifically trained in English language learners. You are a general education teacher, came to IPS through Teach for America, and kind of got, got thrown into the mix here. And so based on our conversation, it sounds like a 6-year-old student had a pretty big impression on you. Wanted to know if you could kind of share that story and how that changed the way that you look at your classroom.
Yeah, so it takes it back to, I think it was 2013, and I had a class of first graders. It was my very first class, and I had Maite Baron Cortez in my class. And I always had called her Maite. And she never had a problem with it until just one day. I guess that's how 6-year-olds are. And we're in math class, and she's raising her hand, and I said, "Yes, Maite?" And she kind of looks at me like this and goes, can you not call me by that name? And I said, I think that's what I've been calling you. What would you like to be called? And she goes, well, you said that like my Mexican name, and everyone calls me Maite. And I said, okay, well, let's have a conversation about this. That's what your mom calls you, right? She goes, yeah. That's what your grandma calls you, right? Mm-hmm. And so I said, so I'm gonna call you Maite. Is that okay? Because, I'm Mexican too. I can spin it, She goes, yeah, that's fine. Well, I turn around and then she goes, can I call you Mr. Rangel? And I said, you can call me Mr. Rangel. Everyone else calls me Mr. Wrangle, but yeah, that's fine. And in that instant, I kind of realized that I had been living 23 years of my life going by Wrangle, and I didn't even really know why. So I went back. This year, Teach for America has diversity conversations as part of its programming. And one of my conversations or dialogues that I was having, one of the teachers said, hey, you're Mexican and you have a Mexican last name. Why don't you go by Rangel? And I was like, oh, it's just going to be too difficult. No one's going to know who I really am. And they're like, yeah, but that's what you really are. That's who you really are. It's your identity. I was like, yeah, you're right. So went back with my grandma. I was like, Grandma, how am I allowing myself to be called Wrangle? My dad calls himself Wrangle, my uncles. And she said, mijo, it was something that they learned at school. At the bank, my grandma will correct anyone. She'll be like, I'm Mrs. Rangel, but my uncles and dad have changed it. And she said, they didn't want to be outcasted. They didn't want to be different, so they changed it to Wrangle. We've been asked if we were German. They're like, oh, that must be a Wrangle. And I'm like, no, it's not Wrangle. But I had this, deep feeling like if I'm living my life as this teacher who, has 30 kids in my classroom every day, 20 to 30 kids, I'm not serving as a best reflection of their culture and their identity by allowing myself to go by Wrangle. So this summer, changed it real quick. I came in with my new class, who were fourth graders last year, and they're like, why did you change your last name? I was like, funny story, I actually didn't change it. It's been this way the whole time. And it's encouraged a lot of conversations in my classroom about identity and being who you actually truly are and, being affirmed in that way.
Fantastic. Mayu, so I wanted to know from you what prompted you to start the Burmese Community Center for Education, and just to tell us a little bit of your story trying to advocate for kids in classrooms on the north side.
It was in 2009, 2010, I was a student at IU Bloomington and received a call from someone at the First Baptist Church asking for help because they were dealing with Burmese at church and in the community. And I visited, there were a group of us at IU at the time. And we came to work with the church people, working with the Burmese in the community. And that was our first encounter. We came to volunteer one whole day because there was the dentist from IUP, the campus, they had a day for Burmese kids to come and do their teeth. So we volunteered one whole day there and went back. But I guess we never really got back to Bloomington. We stayed in Indianapolis since then, came back and forth, and realized that there was so much to do for a community that needs so much help, because we are talking about a community that came out of the war zone in Burma. The war that has been going on for 66 years, and these people did not live in the cities. They lived literally in the war zones. Their villages were burned down. Frequently, they fled in the forest. They hide if they were chased, if they heard boots of the Burmese soldiers, they fled again. If they heard the boots, they fled again. And they kept running like that. And they called those temporary shelters their homes for many times until they came to a refugee camp and then came to the United States. So we are talking about a generation of people who who did not get to go to school for the whole generation, and working to help them in this country, in the system. This is the first world country. There was so much to do, and as students ourselves, we thought probably we cannot possibly help them, or help all of their problems, or help all the people in the community, but we could help young people or people who would like to learn so that they can learn and help themselves. So that's how the idea came about to start an education center. And I always believed, personally always believed that through education we can liberate ourselves. And we live, education is, for me and for my family, education is a practice of freedom. So based on that belief and idea, we started this community center and work with the community, and especially with the students. And like you said, based in Washington Township, so mostly we work with most of our students go to Washington Township schools, Nora Elementary, Spring Mill, Northview, and North Central, and now even more schools added that I'm not familiar with. So when we started, the students that we started working with now left the high school. Either they graduated or they just left because they turned 18 and they could leave. And that group was probably the hardest group to work with, the hardest experience for them as well as for us, because they were very new to the country at the time. They had been to the country for 7 months, 9 months, or a year at most. And they were trying to discern and understand the system, to know their way around in school, to remember their bus number. So everything, like Ellie said, very new and overwhelming. And the worst, and remains to be the most difficult, is to work with students who had severely interrupted education background. Many of our students were born and raised in refugee camps. So at least they got to go to school, regardless of what type of education they received, whether it was compatible with the education here or not. At least they went to school consecutively. Whereas there are many students as well who had severely interrupted education background, who did not go to school, who are now, for example, 15 years. But their whole 15 years of life, they went to school for 3 years. But they came to this country, and as you all know, the system questions how old you are, not what grade were you or did you go to school before. So if you are 15, you are in a grade where 15 years old has to be. So working with, speaking as a student, for a student with severely interrupted education background have the worst experience. And working with that, that kind of students is the most difficult situation. And speaking of that, I just sent off a letter today to the principal at North Central supporting the student's decision to leave school because he no longer finds the school benefiting. And the mother supported his idea. He turned 18 as well. And the mother supported his idea because the mother is concerned that the son will be suffering from too much stress, being in classroom without understanding anything.
Obviously, throughout, our reporting, we talked with, people who were are facing this challenge, kind of head on, and really like schools who are really kind of making this the central focus that they work on. There's other schools who are struggling to kind of bridge this gap. They're, dealing with just so few resources, such a fast change that it's hard for them. Charlie, can you kind of, what do you hear from teachers? What do you hear from schools about what has been most challenging for them to deal with when it comes to, the expanding population of immigrant students and English learners?
Well, I think something that we often talk to schools about is about who owns the learning of these students. And so when you have a small population where a school is just starting to maybe receive this population, or they're becoming predominant within their whole school culture, for a long time they would say, oh, just go to the ESL teacher and they'll fix you. They'll teach you English and then you can kind of come to my content class and we can then start learning because you've learned English now. Well, that's just not effective at all. And oftentimes another strategy would be to pull them out of that content time and from their English-speaking peers and segregate them in a way. And say, well, we're going to learn over here while the rest of the class is doing this. And so you have somebody who comes with uninterrupted schooling, and now it just become even more uninterrupted, right? I mean, it's continuously being interrupted because they're being pulled out. And so I think what schools are struggling with is who owns these students? Well, the answer is everybody owns these students. And so English throughout the day, it's just not something that happens in isolation for 15 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day. And so when we talk to schools, we call this the 250 versus the 1950. If you service a student with English, whether it's an ESL class or it's some sort of co-teaching model for, say, 30 to 40 minutes a day, which is seems like that's doable. That's actually really hard in a lot of places, and that's even on a good week that happens because the ESL teacher may be pulled to translate for a family, or they may be pulled to go this or that, and so they don't have the staffing's not quite adequate enough. So, on a good week, you get 250 minutes of instruction. Well, if you embed it throughout the day where every teacher understands the linguistic needs of these students, the cultural needs of these students, and provides equitable learning through content and English at the same time, you get to like 1,950 minutes per week. And so to put this with a sports analogy, we say, let's take Andrew Luck. If he throws 250 passes versus 1950, which week is he going to be better? Well, he practiced more. He had more opportunities. And so I think schools struggle with a couple things. One is, how do you create a culture that is supportive in the building where every minute of every day is an opportunity for, one, that child to be honored for who they are in their home language, and two, that they're learning academics and English at the same time. So I think that's one. The other issue is adequate staffing, which is one that we hear all the time. And so whether it is not having properly trained ESL teachers with the proper license, or maybe they've hired instructional assistants who are wonderful in doing hard work but are not professionals in the way in which they need to be in terms of knowledge. And so schools struggle with capacity. And then how do you reach all of these students? For example, if you have a school with 200 English learners, how many staff do you usually need to service those students? In some states, they'll give you a ratio. They'll say, oh, it's 30 students for every staff member. Well, in Indiana, we don't do that. And so we use the Castaneda rule. So it's three-pronged. One, whatever service you provide those students has to be research-based. The second prong is that it has to be resourced appropriately, which means you have the right amount of staff, the right amount of materials, the right amount of funding going into that research-based practice. And the third piece that schools really struggle with is the evaluation of those practices on how effective they are. So what we see is that schools do something. They're providing something that research backs. Now, it may not be done to fidelity, it may not be wonderful, or it may be the best thing you've ever seen in your life. It's everywhere on the continuum, okay? They do a good job with that. They do a good job with trying to resource it, but they've had limited funding, and that's a real reality that we've had to tackle. This year was a good year. I applaud the legislators for what they did this year. That's just the beginning, by the way. We have a long way to go, but it's a great start in that direction. But if you don't evaluate what you're doing, you don't know if it's being effective or not. And so schools will go year after year after year not evaluating how effective they've been. And so they could have been doing something very poorly for a long time and never knew it. The other thing they don't think deeply about is that English learners are different. Every single one of them. And Mayu's talked about one group that we may have, but another group that we have in Indiana we call our long-term English learners. These are students who've been in the country for 6 or more years and still have not attained proficiency in English. They have a different set of needs. And so working with classroom teachers and understanding that what you do with a student who's a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 has to look different. And working with English learner teachers or ESL teachers and saying, You can't have levels 1 through 4 in the same room and teach to the middle and expect that to meet the needs of all of those students. So it's about realizing it's an individual pathway for every child, and that's really hard to do. So I think all of those things really, are things we hear about all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Eddie, tell us about, so you're, a content area teacher. You have students of, you have a variety of students of all different levels. You have English learners, you have, just kind of everyone in your class, and you have to, you're faced with, kind of this new expectation of, these English learners are, your responsibility to teach them. What has that been like for you? Has that been a challenge? And what do you hear from other teachers?
It's been extremely challenging. Actually, this year I have the high ability grouping. So there's 6 high ability students, and then I have 3 ELL students, and then I also have another cohort of special needs students. So it's been the gamut. I mean, it's really tested me this year. One thing that I've had to really message in my classroom is fairness in 5th grade. So, because a lot of students will say, you spend a lot of time with those students, or they must be like, they do it by colors. They must need a lot of help. We talk a lot about like what is fair. It's not always what is equal, it's what is needed. So I am all hands on deck. Like, I'm no superhero or anything. I call for help when I need it. We have a fantastic staff at Key who is ready to push in. You were mentioning, Charlie, that they sometimes pull out a lot. That was something I was like, I can't break up the culture in the classroom and like have people identify other children as like, oh, they're getting pulled out, they must be going somewhere else. Keeping them in the classroom as much as possible and keeping them in the dialogue constant. So we've got a lot of adults in the building. And sometimes, especially during math class, I have 3 other adults in my classroom. And they're sitting in different stations, and we're all working together because literally it takes the village for classrooms such as mine. What I hear from other teachers that's really difficult is investing everyone else and truly having everyone take ownership of all students. So specifically with my ELL students, I hear other teachers in my building saying it's very difficult to cross lines of difference when having conversations with the parents. They're nervous about having those conversations because they're not sure what they're communicating, and I've run into it myself. I'm not sure how to communicate certain things or like how it'll affect the student. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is investing everyone, and then being confident enough to invest the families of the students.
Ellie, for you, what made a difference for you? You said you appreciated your teachers at Southport for helping you kind of with, this big just, change in your life. What really helped you that they did? What made a difference for you?
For me, I would say because all the teachers, they have this curriculum that they have to meet. They have to have a certain number of students passing ECA algebra or ECA English each year. So the teachers work really hard, and a lot of times the teachers only focus on meeting the bar, and the bar is too high, especially if you're having like English as new language learners. So the teachers they push us a lot, and sometimes they pull us. But the teachers at Southport High School are different because besides pushing us and pulling at times, they're willing to work beside us. They actually try to understand, just beside doing good at school, what is going on at our home, what are the things that might be interfering with our education, what are the things or what is the background or the culture difference that might stop us or slow us from learning, because they're willing to go farther than other teachers. I would say that make a big difference because they're actually willing to work beside us.
You mentioned testing. So I think, in the series, something that we learned, something I've talked to all these guys about is just the difficulties that schools have faced when it comes to testing. And I'm wondering if we can talk about this. what is a sensible and realistic testing policy when it comes to educating English learners? Obviously, you know, I think everyone here wants to have high standards for, you know, their students, but also there's this element of what is realistic. You know, I interviewed a student through an interpreter who works with Mayu, who is very gracious to do this, but we interviewed a student at Northwest High School who had to take the I-STEP test. He was from a refugee camp in Thailand. He had never been to school in the refugee camp. He's 15. He's a 7th grader at Northwest. In his first week at school, they sat him in front of the I-STEP test. He has to take the math exam. And it, you know, the second year that he does that, it's going to count against the accountability. So, you know, I think it's an interesting, you know, welcome to America type thing, as one of my sources told me. So just wondering if we can talk about that. What is sensible? What is realistic when it comes to testing? Mayu, why don't you take a crack at it?
My experience, I came to United States in 1993, and in 94 I started trying to get into college. I went to community college in California, and so we had to take placement tests. And one of the tests, English placement test, the essay was to read a page of essay and to write, to reflect on that. And the essay was about the use of no plant. And in Korean language, no stands for miss. So I thought no plant was some kind of person's name. And I kept on reading, and obviously no plant wasn't a person's name. So I had no idea. But that was the test. There was a test for me. I had to read this essay and write something. So I think based on my experience and the experience of this young student, even if there would be some kind of preparation before we give a test to a student, the new learners, the preparation would have to be different. I could read that page of essay, but I did not have any idea, culturally, I did not have any idea what was written in the content of the essay. I had no idea culturally. And for this student, he could not read. He could not read and write. I don't know how we could test. So even if we are going to prepare students so that they could sit for exam test that is required of them, still the preparation would have to be different.
And Charlie, I talked to the Department of Education, you know, asking that. I think something that has been asked a lot to us is why not translate the I-STEP test into Spanish, into you know, Burmese, into other languages. And I think it's like 280 something languages that are spoken by our students in the state. They basically kind of told us like, no. So what is your take on that? What's fair, what's sensible?
Well, I think there's some things for us to consider and to think deeply about. So although testing on the first day for that student seems 100% inappropriate, right? When we look at the other anecdotal stories and evidence, there are stories of students coming and maybe people would assume they could not pass that test, but they did. So a particular student I had, her name was Lily. Lily was from a country in Asia. Lily comes in, similar story. We thought, okay, she can take the pass on the English language arts portion because you're allowed to, but has to take math and science that's what she had to do. And she passed plus mathematics. So now all of a sudden we're talking about, oh, Lily, we need to think about maybe a GT placement or a high ability for her, right? So, you know, what's in terms of what makes sense, it's an individual student situation again. And so the other thing I think to think about is if we don't test the students, we don't know where they are. And then how do we hold schools accountable for those things? So if you wait, say, 3 years, can a school then just ignore the situation for 3 years? If anything that No Child Left Behind brought us was the idea that these marginalized populations Now schools are talking about them. Now schools care. When before they could have said, oh, in 3 years they'll get it figured out. But now they're saying, okay, right away, we've got to really think deeply about what's equitable for this student. And really, it's a civil rights situation, right? That student is here. That student deserves to have a first-class education on content that is grade level appropriate for that student's age. And so those are just things that we think about deeply, because the stories of the student struggling are real, and that's a real scenario for a lot of folks. But if we don't do the assessment, what are the repercussions because of that? And that's just another angle that oftentimes we hear individuals talk about. And the federal government's very big in this space. This is kind of their particular points.
So if you sat down with leaders in Congress who are, maybe working on the rewrite of NCLB, what would you ask, like, in your perfect world, what would you want in terms of a testing policy for Indiana EL students?
Well, one, I think that we need to ask the federal government for individual flexibility based on the state's needs. So to apply a one-size-fits-all to the entire country, I think, is really tough, because the students we have in Indiana, we have different needs or unmet needs than another state. But I think one thing we have to pay attention to is the idea of growth. So we're just not looking at whether a student passed or a student failed. But we say, where did that student begin? And then the next year, where did that student, get to? And that's a really powerful piece, going like year to year. And so we look at states like Florida. They've requested flexibility in this space. So instead of having that student score account for accountability negatively for a school, they're saying, okay, for 2 years, the proficiency or the attainment is not going to count, but the growth is going to count. Because for a student who may be an English learner on day 1, not score very well year 1, but then grew tremendously year 2, a lot of credit should be given for the hard work of that student and for that school. But I think you also have to take into consideration the cultural needs and the human needs of the student. And so I think to have a really big dialogue about how we balance those two things, I think are really, really, really important.
Ellie, what was testing like for you when you came? Like, was it something that okay, I'm asking the person who just took the AP Calc BC exam, so what are your thoughts?
That's right.
It's actually tough, and this is just me, a student, saying we have many students. Even if we come from like kind of similar background, we all have different personal struggle and experience, so it's different for all of us. But for my school, one thing that they do that I really appreciate is the first thing they do when I go to school is they test me out. This is for English as new language learners. They have this test. So once I take the test and they decide the level, the English as new language learner levels that I'm supposed to be in, we have level 1 from level 4. So depending on that grade, they put me in a certain level. That was the first thing they did. And depending on the level, we have different teachers who teach us based on like our level. Like, I think someone mentioned something about putting all the students into one level and trying to teach them all. It doesn't work that way. And my school go above and beyond. We have level 1 from level 4. And depending on our test grade, they put us into a certain group. And even up to school, the teachers are staying there without getting extra pay, and they help us and prepare us for ECA, English ECA, and Algebra ECA. And also during spring break and winter break, we have this thing called intersession that the school held. And we have those SAT preparation and ECA preparation. So it was scary taking the test, but because we have those kind of like preparation beforehand, we actually do okay, not so great, especially English. A lot of us fail, but because we have those kind of preparation, comparing to other schools, we actually do, I would say, a lot better.
So something that Ellie touched on is, a big thing that came up over and over again in our reporting, which is funding for EL, English language learners in our state. So we actually kind of discovered, it was really surprising to me when I learned this from Charlie, that Indiana gives $87 extra per student, and that is like, when you compare it to the rest of the country per student, it's really, really low. Like Minnesota gives like 800, we give 87. It really ranges. So we found, this legislative session, lawmakers actually approved, they've more than doubled the amount of funding that EL students are going to receive. So it's going to go up from $87 to $200 extra. So, what do you guys think is really gonna make a measurable difference in the way schools are able to serve English learners? Eddie, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm going to be honest, my first thought as a teacher was development around being the best teacher you can be for your students who are learning English.
Do you think that teachers need more training when it comes to serving English learners?
In my experience, yes. I mean, I've been at it for only 3 years, but I've had very little development in that area, and it's something that I'm concerned about because the population is growing and the development's still not there. I think there are major gains that I've seen in the past 3 years, though, especially in my limited experience of IPS, that they're making an effort. So I think the development on the teacher side.
Mayu, what do you think about the amount of resources that are available to students?
I think, it should help better than it had been being helpful with 87, right? $200. So it's quite a lot higher than the original. So I hope that it would help better. But I think the problem with our students, the difficulty that our students face is very complex in nature. It is not just the difficulty in trying to pick up language, English language, but many of our students, like I said, are almost illiterate in their own language. So you are not just talking about students, young people who do not speak English, young people who cannot read and write in their own languages. And so I'm glad if we share the belief that this is who own these students, and we all own these students, because obviously Burmese Community Center for Education alone cannot do this at all. And one school will not be able to do this. But at the same time, we want these students to get as much education as possible. Coming out of Burma, very oppressive society, and now in the United States, we don't want them to feel oppressed by the knowledge that I am so dumb, I cannot read and write, I am stupid, I cannot even finish high school, so on and so forth. And we don't want them to feel oppressed again with that knowledge. So we want to help them. But I think trying to address the problem or the situation, it's not just money. Money is a big part, but at the same time, I think it, like Ellie's experience, it would require a lot of stakeholders to go to get out of their way and come together. And when the government participates in financially helping, that helps a lot. But I think it goes beyond money.
Well, I definitely wanted to leave time for the audience here and the audience online to be able to ask questions. So I think we have a microphone that we will pass around. Yes, on both sides. So does anyone have a question? And then also, if you have a question online and you're watching, you can tweet it using the hashtag #AmGradIndy, hashtag AmGradIndy. if you could just tell us who you are as well.
Hi, my name's Mary Nolan, and I'm an ESL teacher currently in Pike Township, and I've taught in IPS and also in Wayne. And one of the questions that I have, sort of from my most recent experience, is developing the culture around English as a second language teachers too, because I feel like sort of mainstream classroom teachers don't really know what ESL teachers are doing or what their expertise is and whether they're really necessary or not. And I just feel, you know, that that's a whole area of learning for the education community that needs to happen. And do we feel that ESL teachers are necessary?
Charlie, do you want to take a stab at it?
Absolutely, they're necessary. I was a former ESL teacher. I'm still an ESL teacher. I mean, that's how I identify myself. When somebody says, what do you do? The first thing that comes to my mind is my class of 6th grade boys I had in my first year. I mean, that's who I am and what I do. And I think you're right. Oftentimes when you have a group of professionals that serve a marginalized community, oftentimes those individuals are marginalized themselves, right? And that's a real reality that we see across the board. And I think you hit on something. That is, a lot of it is people just don't know, because their students were sent to be fixed for a long time. And the EL teacher oftentimes worked outside of the community at the school. And so I put this onus on the leadership of the building. And it's up to the principals to honor the work that's being done, to bring it to the forefront, and to realize that this burden or this honor of serving English learners cannot fall on one person. It's about working in community. And what we have known as we've done our research qualitatively across the state, as we've traveled, is that schools oftentimes start with an ESL class. And that ESL teacher is the one who's in charge of that. And sometimes is given a lot of authority over those students that goes beyond just teaching. Sometimes you're the social worker. You're the one who's calling the food banks. You're the one who's doing all sorts of things to help, the wraparound services and everything else, as everybody else is waiting for you to kind of, like I said, fix the child. But what we've seen is that schools have to move past that to where they're creating great programs. What I mean by that is that English learners are represented well in the high ability program. They're represented well on the sports teams and throughout the whole culture and all the different activities that are happening. You have a true program. And so that requires the EL teacher also to take some of the responsibility on saying, I have to leave my classroom and this safety place where I've been for a long time and start to get to know the greater community and programs within the building. Once you build a great community, the next step, a great program, the next step is thinking about community. What I mean is about working and living in community. That's both inside the building and outside the building. So when we talk to leaders, we say, make sure that EL teacher is on your leadership team. Right? They know the ins and the outs of these students. Make sure they're represented on the teacher leadership team. Make sure they're represented on this, that they're just not put aside, but they're a part of what's happening in this building. And then what we know is that when a strong community is built, culture in the building changes. When we go into a building where there's a true culture, where ELs are put at the forefront, it's amazing the role of the EL teacher. And I think those are things we have to think deeply about, and you're right. I think it's about honoring the work that the EL teacher is doing and will do, but making sure that we build a community that can impact our larger culture.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that question?
May I say something? I just couldn't imagine being here today, first of all, without God, and then second of all, my family, and then my teachers, my ENL teachers. They go above and beyond, not just inside of class, outside of class, after school. I would stay, a whole bunch of ENL students, we would go to our ENL teacher for help, and then they help us with our college application, our scholarships application, because everything is so new to us, and they're teachers who are willing to give their time for us. And as they teach us, they start understanding our cultures and our things better, so they actually are even more helpful than comparing to other teachers, ENL teachers. And because of they help us with those process, I would say our school, and especially me, I can be where I'm at today because of them.
I'd like to build on that comment, I think. You said something I think is interesting. You said the college application piece. counselors at the high school are so important to the success of a student overall. From planning the 4-year pathway to college applications. And so I think what I'm saying here is that community piece, it's just not the classroom teacher and the EL teacher and the principal, it's the nurse, it's the counselor, it's everybody understanding the needs, both linguistic and cultural, of the students and working together. Because if not, it's the individual ESL teacher who tries to do everything. And I wish that they could do everything, but the reality is they can't. And so it really does take everybody working together.
Do we have another question anywhere?
Good evening. Thank you so much. I'm Trish Marita Mullaney. I'm with Purdue University, and I'm also the president of the Indiana chapter of Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. We have a large proportion of our board and members here tonight, and so thank you so much. My question is actually multifaceted. I'm at the university, and we have an ELL licensure program, but I also know that my colleagues in other universities have licensure programs, and they're not the same. Some are as few as 12 units with no student teaching to as many as 24 units with a full 8 to 12 weeks of student teaching required. And so you can imagine that, do you want to go to the 50% off program or to the full whammy? And I can tell you as a researcher and a practitioner, I know what individual I would prefer to hire. But in addition to that, Indiana is one of 3 states that does not require pre-service education of all of its educators for English learners. Most public universities do that because we have to get through our accreditation. But a lot of universities don't do that in Indiana. So depending on where you're prepared, depends on if you've had 1 class or 2 classes or no classes. I'm going to tell you that most people have no classes. So I guess I would want to know, policy, but also practitioner, and really how could INTESOL, our organization, be helpful in maybe creating greater consistency and maybe greater coherence about what we're doing in pre-service education, but also in the types of licensures that we are creating. So,
Eddie, why don't you take a stab at that? You briefly touched on training for teachers. Tell us what would be helpful. Tell us what you see from other teachers and what you would maybe like for yourself.
Yeah, so I went through Teach for America and was a student at Marion University. And Teach for America, it's not a full-time, I'm at Teach for America every day. I'm in my classroom every day. And so they did, I believe, what they were able to do and fulfilled what I needed as a teacher to start conversations for teaching ESL students. Marion University had a course that we took as master's students, and it was 1 semester. There was no clinical practice. So I think what is necessary is, to your point, you were saying what would be most beneficial is kind of having that clinical practice as part of the theories and here are all these strategies, and then instead of just saying, go out into your classrooms and try them, hey, we've got these settings that you actually need to be documenting what you're trying, you need to be reflecting on what you're practicing in those moments with those ESL students, and then you need to come back and we need to discuss these and how you can be better fitted to provide the services that your students need. So I think the clinical practice piece would have been life-changing for me as a teacher.
What do you think, Charlie, is this something that you think would be, is this something you guys have advocated for? Is this something that you think would be palatable? Tell us about that.
What time are we over tonight? I think is the real question. I think a couple things. When I came to the department, as I mentioned, I was an ESL teacher, and then I was an instructional coach, and then I worked at the district level. I actually worked with Mayu a lot in MSD Washington Township. And when I came to the state, I had 3 big ideas and goals that I had dreams for Indiana. The first one was that we needed a high-quality assessment instead of standards, and so we moved that way by joining the WIDA Consortium. Okay, so we stopped thinking about English learning in isolation, and not only in an ELA or an ESL classroom, but started thinking, okay, how do we learn academic language? How do we learn social language across the whole day? And WIDA provides that framework for us so that we're developing language in math and science and social studies because this is what the students need to be successful. And with that, we also received a high-quality assessment. And so we had been using the same assessment, Form A and Form B, on a rotating basis for too long. And so we moved towards a high-quality assessment. And so we felt like, okay, now we've given teachers and schools the expectations and also the tools that they needed to do what the federal government was requiring us, but also what we knew we had to do. That was the first goal. Okay? The second goal was to think about funding. So we've got to put the right people doing the right work. And I'm going to comment on what I would have said if you asked, what can we do with $5.5 million more? I have a lot of ideas, about 5 million of them. But I think we need to think about how we can meet specific unmet needs. What we don't want is that these dollars to go into backfill positions that schools are already paying for, right? So a school says, oh, I have $180,000 more. Now I can pay for those teachers I've always had. No, what we want is something that goes above and beyond. I also want to see schools think really innovatively. So oftentimes we talk about newcomers when we talk about English learners, but about 50% of them are level 4 students on our current scale of 5, which means they're advanced. What we know about a level 4 student is this. Passing a standardized test for them comes about a 50-50 shot. But a level 5 student who is considered fluent English proficient passes at 96%. That's higher than any other subgroup, including white, in Indiana. So that tells us that if we can get students to a place where they're achieving English proficiency, that their opportunities for the future are wide open. All sorts of different pathways they could potentially take. So I want schools to think deeply about how they use the funding for the level 4 students. I think that's really, 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 really important. Now back to the original question. What was the original question?
Training. Talk about, we're talking
Licensure,
about...
thank you.
Yes,
Funding was
licensure.
the second thing we wanted to tackle. And so it's funny, back when we were talking in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and because the superintendent put funding for English learners as one of her top 4 priorities, which I think is fantastic. That's wonderful. English learners have never had that sort of priority status before for a long time. And so when we went, my question was, Charlie, what's your dream? How much do you want to ask? I said, 60 million. We're going for 60 million. Well, we didn't quite get 60, but we got something, right? And so funding was the next piece. The third goal that we need to think deeply about is licensing. And we've got to have some real serious conversations about this. Currently, to teach an ESL class in the elementary school, you don't even need an ESL endorsement. All you need is a teacher license. And so when we think about several years ago where not very many individuals had a teacher license that had an ENL endorsement on it, and they were very, very few and far between, that made sense. Well, that isn't the case now. I think the last count was around 900 or so in the state that have this license. And so we have individuals who are qualified. And so we need to think about quality. We just can't have that research-based intervention or a research-based program. We have to have the right person doing the right work. And so we need to think about those things. We need to think about in the general licensing, how are our teacher prep programs preparing the future teachers? Otherwise, we're constantly in this game of cat and mouse. We hire a teacher, we have a large ESL population, so then we've got to train this teacher. Well, what if they came trained before they came to us? Wow, what kind of advancement could we make in that sort of model? And so it's a conversation that's happening now, and it's happening in a very deep way. It's looking at other states, saying, how did you phase this process in? Because to say, tomorrow everybody has to have an ESL license, that's really hard for the system. So how do we do that in a way that makes sense? Who do we have to talk to do that? What sort of support do we need to gather on the state board? All of those things with any massive policy change means a lot of hands are in it and have a lot of voices going to be heard. And that takes time. But that time now is being spent to think deeply about it. So that's kind of where we are. I would say it's one of our biggest priorities and things that we want to have a great dialogue and conversation about here now.
Mayu, you've obviously worked with, many students and teachers, tried to communicate with them. What do you see as, just kind of as a community member in the schools when it comes to, teacher training and preparation to handle and serve the types of students that also come to you?
I think it is different at the school levels. I think our children in the community, working with children in our community, we notice from the start, we notice that children in the elementary schools have more positive experience. Teachers tend to be more interactive, more involved. So that also created opportunity for us to have communication and interaction with teachers from elementary schools. So that's very positive. And that all teachers, not just ELN teachers, but all teachers. But I think it's different in middle school level and high school level. It becomes more difficult, more isolated. It's extremely, I find personally my experience communicating with the teachers at high school is extremely difficult. And also more students in high school, more students in terms of the school population, not necessarily many Burmese students, but it's more students. So I think all teachers tend to be more preoccupied. So I did not, and it's not very positive experience, but at the same time, I think learning from our students, our students who had consecutive educational experience, who had gone to school consecutively and continue their education, for example, at North Central, they tend to have, with their teachers, their ELN teachers, they tend to have very good relationship, and the cooperation is very, very warm and active. Whereas there are a group of students in our community that I think are effectively invisible on campus and are marginalized, because I think it's a shame for me to say this because I think we don't know what to do with these students. EL teachers probably don't know what to do, how to help these students. And I cannot also help. I took one parent for her son to school to get the school records. And I went to school in this country for the past 15 years. I went to higher education to get myself higher education and so on and so forth. And I went to school 3 times and I did not get anything. I got lost in the system. And that's, I think, the general experience of our students, our parents, our community with high school. So I think the experience is different at high school and at school levels.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Meg Troxel. I'm the new secondary ESL specialist for IPS, and I'm also the vice president in TESOL. My question has to do with teaching assistants and paraprofessionals that are serving almost as the teaching role as the sole person in buildings, and depending on the district are being overseen by people that are not educated in ENL services in any fashion, and how that impacts kind of the state and our ability to move all of those students from 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then to exit them, because I know that's a frequent thing. And when I've worked with even other districts or talked to people that are in other districts that are really wanting help from their teachers that are just kind of coming to ask me, even if I don't work with their district, for just resources and help. So what are your thoughts, I guess, on that, and how can we move forward?
Do you see that a lot, Charlie, with teachers relying on
paraprofessionals? Yeah, I mean,
paraprofessionals?
the best thing you can do for an EL student is to put the highest quality teacher in front of them, right? Who knows the complexities, who understands the pedagogy, understands what has to happen. I think schools struggle a lot with financing and what, so for example, you can pay for 3 assistants or 4 assistants and put the money at the direct supervision of a classroom teacher, which meets federal requirements, right? for the same price as one teacher. And so they see, I guess, boots on the ground, for a lack of a better term, right? More individuals who can help with these students. But you suffer quality, or quality suffers in a really big way. So you may have 4 teachers who are doing, or individuals that may be doing not even the highest quality that one individual could do, right? But I think schools struggle with the idea of what it feels like by not having those 4 people and just going down to 1, because then all the other teachers are saying, where's my support in my classroom? So there's a lot of different models that I think schools now are trying to think deeper about. That may not be the best model. And when I was talking earlier about saying something has to be research-based and it has to be resource appropriate, they have to evaluate, oftentimes in this model, they haven't evaluated how effective they're really being. What they know is that it feels good because they've got an individual in the classroom that's helping this student that desperately needs it, but what is that support really getting them? And so now at the stage we're asking them to deeply evaluate what they're doing. And we've changed even how the granting process works so that it causes them to be self-reflective, to evaluate their current process to make sure it is working. And if it isn't, they need to think differently about that. We also have an accountability measure called AMAOs. And if a district misses it for 2 years, they go on an improvement plan. They miss it for the 3rd year, they update the improvement plan. And in year 4, they have to have some sort of substantial change, and we work with them on that process. And oftentimes, it's in the structure of their model. And what you're talking about is what we see those districts that are in year 4, that they've been doing this model and not getting results. And so they have to think differently about that. I think a lot of that comes on the state and holding schools accountable and districts accountable for what they're doing and ensuring that these students are progressing and academically and in their language development. And so we've put a lot of measures in place to do that, things that had never been happening before. For example, with the 2-year plan, it was just a requirement that you write the plan. They really weren't evaluated for quality. Well, now they go through a very thorough evaluation. Isn't that right, Rachel? Rachel does those for us, and she's shaking her head. So this year alone, we've seen more districts than ever say, you know what, you're right. What we've been doing has been subpar, and we're going to hire more teachers. Or what we've been doing is subpar, we're going to develop the capacity of our classroom teachers, we're going to hire a coach, and we're going to change our model. So I think it's going to be a slow process, but people are slowly coming around to the idea that quality matters, right? And how we judge quality is through a thorough evaluation, just not that it feels great that we have 4 individuals helping these kids. So I'm hopeful. I'm more hopeful than ever after this year and seeing schools truly transform. Those who have made those choices, we've seen substantial growth and changes. And it takes the organization like in TESOL, it takes university partners to pull this off effectively.
We have a question from Twitter from Andrea. She wants to know if Mr. Ronhell felt like a weight was lifted off his shoulders when he had his aha moment. And I'm fascinated about your experience, digging into this work as someone who does not have this special training. Like, how did your classroom change? What are you currently thinking about when it comes to serving these students? And what do you think? I mean, obviously, I think, a lot of people here, of course, like, we're talking about what would be the best case scenario, but for the current reality, what can teachers, just regular content area teachers, do to help these students?
So I'll answer the Twitter question.
A million questions.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. It's like, okay, it's a list. Well, first, I think the weight actually got a little bit heavier because now I'm saying, I'm a Latino teacher, I have a Latino last name, I grew up with Mexican grandparents who immigrated here. And then they're like, do you speak Spanish? And I'm like, here or there, I can understand a little bit. So I've personally felt a responsibility to become a better teacher by, seeking to get the tools that I need to, not only converse with my Spanish-speaking parents, but I am, in my first grade classroom, I also had parents from Eritrea, and tools that I would need to effectively communicate with them. So I think the burden's a little bit heavier, but it's a good burden because I know that it's going to benefit my students in the long run. I think the last question that I remember you asking was what teachers can do now, general education teachers can do now. And something that Charlie was talking about was like getting the leadership in the buildings to recognize that you need your EL teachers on your leadership boards. And truly messaging to general education teachers who may not have that training right now to be co-teachers with those teachers. It's not even just like a pull and push out service. It is a co-teacher that you need to be planning with, that you need to be extremely purposeful in how you are developing curriculum and differentiating for every student. So I think it's getting my cogs turning in my brain, like, you know, messaging to all teachers. They are co-teachers, they're in your building, and they have equal importance, and you need to leverage them in your building.
Hi, my name is Marcia Manning, and I am an ESL teacher at Southport. I teach a newcomer program, but my question, I also go to Central 9 Career Center, and we have a large population of kids, our English language learners, who are wanting to go out there to look at, instead of maybe college, they're more interested in a career or, you know, learning like engineering. They want to be an engineer, but they want to go into, you know, the career center. And I was wondering if there's any discussion with the career centers around the city, with the teachers there to better work with, you know, EL students, the discussion around their learning plans and things like that.
Charlie?
Sure. I mean, this is, as I was talking earlier about building great programs in community and how that changes culture, this speaks to that exactly, right? So we have to look at an English learner should have every opportunity as every other student, right? Bottom line. And they should be provided with an individual pathway according to their individual learning plan that is equitable and doesn't say, oh, because you speak a second language or because you live in English that you should be limited in any way. If anything, you're an asset to your community, you're an asset to the classroom, and that's how you should be viewed. And so we have a lot of discussions at the department with the CTE group. One thing that we talk about often is about working in convergence at the Indiana Department of Ed. And what I mean by that is oftentimes you think, oh, it'd be great if we just collaborate a little bit more. But really when we're collaborating, it's sort of self-serving in a lot of ways. It's saying, what are you doing? Okay, here's what I'm doing. I want to take a little bit of what you're doing and let's go do this. But when you work in convergence, it means you're doing the work together. And I think that's something that you talked about co-teaching. That's the power in that, is that you have a classroom teacher or an EL specialist who's saying, not, hey, here's a couple strategies to try tomorrow. They're saying, hey, I'm going to come in and let's do this work together. It's your teachers coming alongside of you. I love that picture you painted when you talked about the teacher wasn't leading, the teacher was alongside. I think that's so powerful. And so the department, we put a big effort into saying, okay, how can the college and career readiness staff, how can the EL staff, the Title I staff, the special ed staff, how can we do this work together? So what we often say is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I'm serious about that. When English learners are not at the table, they're on the menu. And so we've worked very closely to make sure that one of our staff members is representing English learners on every single group as possible. And so that's unique because we have Nathan, and many of you know Nathan, who's amazing in his role as an English learner specialist, but also led all of the standards implementation. So English learners were from the beginning represented through that whole process. And so when it comes to career tech, that's what we're doing right now. Laying the groundwork and saying, how can we work in convergence and make this happen and set the right policies so the right practices and protocols happen?
We'll give the last question to Ellie here. Ellie, what would you want people to know about, what do you think that either is misunderstood about English learners, or what would you want teachers, schools to know about what would help you in school?
Just also in the video, I heard a lot of things about opportunities, and we all work every day to get our life better, and we all look for a better opportunities. I know that, but the things that a lot of people don't understand is that we come here as the first place because we are at the line of life or death. We're not looking for opportunities, the first reason that we come here. It's whether you die or you fight and you escape. And I know that even like people here today, they are working every day to get a better life and a better opportunities. So I feel like a lot of times people think the reason we come here in the first place is because of greed. And a lot of time we get like, criticized. We get a lot of misunderstanding for that. And at my school, we currently have a referendum because there's a carrying capacity, like because our school needs more like school extension. And so the school board meeting, they recently has a school board meeting. And as the school board meeting, I volunteer as one of the National Honor Society member to help pass out the paper. And I heard a lot of parents saying things about how taxes have been raising because of immigrant kids or refugee kids, and they complain about those things. And a lot of time, like I said, because people think because we come here at first place because of greed, I have been hearing a lot of negative things, and as much as I don't like to hear those things, some of them are true, some of them are not. And I'm thankful to those people because they remind me every day not to take the things I get to experience and being able to go to school again, not to take those things for granted. And I'm especially thankful to the people and teachers who are trying to go above and beyond without getting nothing back in returns, that they are willing to help us, that they are trying to walk along us. And I know that especially ENL teachers, they don't get enough credits or pay for what they have done. And especially since this week is a Teacher Appreciation Week, not just this week, but every day. If you're a teacher sitting here tonight or watching us live stream, thank you so much for what you have done. And especially if you're an ENL teacher, as an ENL student representing all English as new language learners, we thank you, we love you, you make a difference. You might not get enough praise or enough pay or enough credits for what you have done, but you are making a difference every day in our life. And thank you for that. And we don't say that dentists are bad when their patients have cavity, but when their students do bad, teachers get a lot of time. They would get these things and they would get pressure because usually they don't meet the bar that the school had set for, which are too high to meet, even for a lot of time for the native students. You are the unsung heroes of our society and community. We love you and thank you.
She pretty much said it all. Thank you so much to our panelists. This has been an incredible conversation and definitely a conversation that we would love to keep going. So please, send us your story ideas, your concerns, things that you're proud of, things that you're afraid of, and we will try to write about those things. Let's give another round of applause to our panelists. Also, I wanted to take a moment to personally thank and recognize each of the people from schools and other organizations around the city who we talked to for this series, or if you were quoted in our stories or interviews, please stand up, and we'd like to give you guys a round of applause as well. Another note we wanted to make sure of was something that was really important to us as we were writing and publishing this series was making these stories accessible to people who speak a variety of different languages. We're very excited to announce that Luna Language Services, an organization in Indianapolis, has very generously donated translated versions of our stories in Spanish and Burmese, and we'd love to share these with anyone who wants them. So if you haven't signed up on our sign-up sheet, please do that so we can reach out to you to get those translated stories to you so that you can share them with your organization. I would like to thank our partners and sponsors again, Chalkbeat, WFYI, Central Library, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the American Graduate Project, the Indy Star, also everyone who helped us organize, promote, and put on this event, especially Gail Strong, Brian Paul, Eric Weddle, and the rest of the team at WFYI, Melanie Whistle and the team at Central Library, Scott Elliott and Shayna Cavazos from Chalkbeat, Stephanie Wong and her team at The Star, and I will turn it over to Gail for your last announcement.
Well, thank you. Hayleigh, this has been awesome. Scott, Eric, thank you for putting this series together that enabled this work to happen. Charlie, Ellie, Eddie, Mayu, thank you for the witness you have offered this evening. It has been inspirational, and I think you've outlined a plan of action for all of us. Thank you for that. I want to give you another opportunity to take action on this issue in this community. We are very privileged at WFYI to host a conversation with Central Library on May 19th. I hope you'll all be here, and I hope you will invite many more. Here's why it's so powerful. You've heard tonight about the disparities that these young people experience in our schools and the barriers that are presented to them on their paths to high school graduation. On May 19th, we will have a national expert here in Central. His name is John Bridgeland. He co-convenes the America's Promise Summit, and he is the co-author of the Grad Nation Report. So it is his job on the national level to dive into the data and to understand the power of effective programs, effective interventions, and how as communities we can do better. Indiana is one of 13 states who is key to our nation hitting the goal of a 90% graduation rate by 2020. He will help us here at Central that night understand what we can do as a state and as a community to help young people do better in schools. What's especially exciting about that is that the next Grad Nation report will be released May 12th. We get him 7 days later. That is really a testament to the confidence that they have in this community to be able to do this work. So please join us. We've put these small flyers out front on the table. So if you would like that calendar reminder, please take that, and please look forward to joining us that evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the powerful work that you do for young people every day, and thank you once again, panel. We're very grateful. Thank you.